Hello again, me again, sorry about that. But I have other people with me this time to make it more interesting for you. Welcome to the panel. Again, part of the content to consumer theme this morning, entitled The New Possibilities for Reaching Audiences. We'll take you through to the coffee break, and I have some great people joining me to do that. Ostensibly, the context of the panel continues with obviously with the theme, and in terms of talking about the change we've seen with kind of content distribution strategies. And here we're talking maybe a little bit more about content distribution in the sense of how the industry that makes and sells and produces content makes money and sells it and gets it out to the world. Ever since TV started traveling across the globe from the 50s, there's been a market for content. It's actually fascinating if you go back to the 50s and the early 60s when the US network started making content. They were already deficit financing from the very beginning, and needing to find extra money from elsewhere when they made their content. And in the 60s, we started seeing the screenings, NatP, MIP arrive, the big markets where everyone goes to sell their content. I think there's a few in the audience who know this. I think BBC Screening started either the late 60s or the early 70s, around then. The US exports about $16 billion a year in terms of TV and film product. The UK over $1 billion. I think there's a bunch, sort of France, Turkey, Israel, Australia, around the 300 mark. So there's a big market there. It's a big industry, and it's changed a lot, and it's had to change a lot with TV over the years. And so this fast pace of change we're seeing now is seeing change for the distributors in the business, a couple of which are represented on the panel today, the enablers and stakeholders and technology providers who do things for them, and for the operators and services that there are in the market. We've talked about vertical integration coming from the studio D2C services. Now we can talk a bit more about that in terms of what distributors' growth strategies are and how AVOD and FAST in particular are emerging as opportunities for distributors to go direct to consumer. We've talked a little bit about AVOD, but not much, and we haven't really talked about FAST, so we're going to address that today. I will get to the panel. I'm going to do a brief introduction, but then I'm going to jump straight in with some questions, and then we'll also come to the audience, and I'll give them all a chance to give a clearer idea of what they're up to and who they are. But I didn't arrange a seating plan, but I've got Simon directly on my right. He's Managing Director of International at Gracenote. He's responsible for helping video distribution platforms across the world kind of overcome the challenge we know that is significant around search, discovery, personalization, in order to make sure you have a decent experience, not just a good experience, but a functioning experience. Then I've got, this is in order, Sean, who's VP of Digital at Banijay Rights. He oversees Banijay's digital self-publishing commercial activities, which includes kind of working along the teams to deal with the FAST space, monetization of clips on YouTube and Dailymotion, and Sean was head of audience development at Endemol Shine Group, and he's worked across various media companies, including Disney. And this is perfectly in order. Carenza, I have next in line, who, like me, is a consultant in the industry, and you won't hold it against us, but Carenza's worked in the streaming business since the early 2000s, starting at PlayStation, where she developed their VOD strategy. She's held roles at the BFI, Warner Media, AMC Networks, and launched a vast range of international services, and I think has been at the coalface plenty of times to know what some of the challenges are. And she established M&E Consulting in 2020 to use that experience. And then finally, last but not least, David at the end. David Smythe, who's CEO of Beyond Rights. Beyond Rights is the distribution arm of Beyond International, and he leads their distribution of a catalogue of many thousands of hours of content, particularly factual entertainment content. He's worked in the AVOD space, so he was a founder and CEO of YouLook.tv, but he's also had 10 years at Fox and almost 10 years at Sky, so we've got some great experience on the panel to talk about this in the world of content acquisition, distribution, streaming, and service provision. That's that. I will definitely try and keep my voice short now. So I'm going to start with David, because he's at the other end. David, perhaps if you could just add to what I've said and give us a quick snapshot of your role at Beyond and what you're up to at the moment.
Thank you. So Beyond Rights is the distribution arm of the wider Beyond group of production companies, and we distribute a catalogue of about 7,000 hours of content around the world from our office here in London. It's largely factual and entertainment, though we have some kids content. We're increasingly looking to lean into scripted, which is my background. But we also acquire content, so we acquire probably more than half of the content that we distribute, we acquire from third-party producers. So typically a producer in this country, for example, might get a green light at Channel 4 or Channel 5 or ITV, and have global rights available or ex-UK rights available, and we often pick up those shows. Conversely, we do the same for shows that are greenlit in the US, and we distribute outside those markets as well. So the catalogue is large, it's varied, it's popular, it's been seen on many channels, but increasingly I think what we find as we look at this space is there are many more opportunities for us to create touch points with audiences, and I think really that's what content distribution is about. It's been said, I think, that content distribution is like an old business, and I think if you take a narrow view that it's about selling a piece of tape from one country into another, it can feel that way. But it's far wider than that. I think if you take the wider view that it's about content distribution is about the process through which content is monetized when it's exposed to audiences. And that means on the full panoply of platforms and opportunities that exist today. So of course it means streaming, and we sell to those services just the same as everyone else, but it also means FAST, it means AVOD, it means perhaps developing services of your own that can sit alongside the activity that you have in selling to third parties. And everything that we do has to be additive. It can't be duplicative of something that you're doing already. So we're constantly looking for, I guess, new ways and new touch points for audiences right now. So, and it's an exciting time because every couple of weeks there's another opportunity that opens up. There are some that feel really new, like social AVOD. Feels like a really new and developing space that's come onto the radar sort of since FAST and since AVOD. So exciting times. So
I looked at the Broadcast UK Distributor Survey last year, and when they asked all the distributors which areas they were expecting to see more growth in for AVOD and FAST, 45% said much more, 45% somewhat more, and the remaining 10% were seemingly indifferent. You would agree that kind of there's a significant growth opportunity there in AVOD and FAST for distributors?
I do, but I also think, how can I put this? So, in a world where there's not where data isn't widely shared, right? So television ratings were a matter of public record, and everyone could see them, and everyone could see how they were doing and everyone else is doing. But that's not really the case in the digital space. So you pick up little kind of nuggets of data from conversations and from anecdotes, and you begin to kind of form a patchwork of kind of data points. There's an incomplete picture. It's not the truth. So whenever you hear of kind of little nuggets that people kind of throw out there, it's potentially misleading, because you kind of think, well, if this show is generating 1 million a month in the US, then my show must also be worth that, and I'm not getting that. Why is that? And I'm always fond of saying that content is not a commodity. It's every piece of content is different until someone else does a better deal. And then all of a sudden you treat your own content as though it is. And the reason I'm saying all of that is that, yeah, I think that there's tremendous growth opportunities, but it's not going to be for everything. It's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be for every piece of content. And the more that market matures, the more true that will become. And it, as it matures, you'll find the demand for new content spike, the demand for exclusivity spike, moving away from deep, deep libraries and more towards a space that kind of looks and feels kind of like basic television.
I'll go to Sean now, actually, because Sean, Banijay, I think from my observations in the market, you were really early to the AVOD fast market. You had channels out there pretty early on. I mean, perhaps you could give us some insight into sort of the scale of the operation and what you've been doing.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, for sure. When we're thinking about fast as a space, and I'm going to go to David's point of thinking about fast and AVOD potentially as additive. I think, we can't turn away from the fact that, of course, from Banijay Right's perspective as well, finished tape and format sales will always lead the commercial, business. What I'm doing here is absolutely looking at those additive spaces, and we really do recognise AVOD and fast as those opportunities for incremental revenues. Going back to David's point, though, as well, in terms of getting into this space, there are operational challenges. A lot does come down to content as well. Not every piece of content is going to work in this space. When we're thinking about fast channels, we're thinking about volume. To run a fast channel, as David mentioned, basic TV, we're going back to scheduling TV programs, and we're going back to scheduling EPGs. From our perspective, we've been in this space since 2019. We've been working with all the major connected TV platforms, the likes of Samsung TV Plus, LG Channels now, Freevee, Pluto and Tubi over in the US. From our perspective, it really is driving about the content. Having approximately 100 hours of content is good for a fast channel, but also making sure that content is curated efficiently and also scheduled accordingly is very key. Operationally, though, from a fast channel, absolutely, the scale of the business, not only internally do you need talent and you need, of course, the content, but I think a lot of people are also starting to realize as well from an operational setup of fast channels, you also probably need a facilitator. That could be a grace note to support with the discovery or the EPG, but it also could be a technology provider as well to physically connect those fast channels into the platforms. So those come with real costs. Yeah. When we're thinking about scale of opportunity and we're thinking about return on investment, this is why it's so important. We're going back to David's point about not every piece of content is going to work in this space, because theoretically, of course, we're all looking for that return on investment. Yeah.
And I guess you both say, I mean, the world of the distributor has changed massively. I mean, I've always felt not just actually in the act of selling content, even if you are selling content to a third party. I think in the old days that was a simpler decision. It wasn't binary. There were factors, but it was much easier to determine. Okay, this is how much you're offering me, or we're going to use it like this. You didn't have to worry so much about what was happening downstream and things like that. So on top of that, you've now got the issues of the fact that if you are effectively running services, that's a whole new mindset, whole new skills, and so you feel that within the organisation.
For me, absolutely. In terms of going back to the talent that's required to launch a fast channel, you go from the commercial negotiation, but then you need editors at desk. You need a content operations team to be able to physically deliver this content to a technology provider. You need channel managers who are reading the available data to then go ahead and program those channels. And for us, we're gifted with such fantastic formats and finished tape that we can go ahead and put into this space. Our flagship channels such as Deal or No Deal or Fear Factor or Survivor, we're really proud of our content, but of course that content needs to be curated effectively to, of course, increase those return on investment.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of kind of needing help and support, I'll move on to Simon. Now, Simon, I haven't done justice to saying who GraceNote are, and I think it's better if you do that, just in case people in the audience don't appreciate. But so maybe if you could tell everyone a little bit about GraceNote and what you do.
Sure. Well, maybe I can start by doing what all good Nielsen people do, which is ask a question. So if you can prepare your hands and maybe put them up very briefly if you've heard of GraceNote. It's a very simple question. Have you heard of GraceNote? Golly, that's a good sort of, what we say, 40%?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And obviously Sean has, and thank you for that. And I'd like to say to Sean that, yes, it does come with a cost, but I'd like to think it's phenomenal value. But And what, in effect, we do for the largest distribution platforms on the planet, whether they be the largest CE manufacturers or whether they be the largest digital distribution platforms of video or whether they be the largest MVPD and pay TV operators in the world, we solve the age-old problem of search and discovery and overcoming that paradox of choice, where people have a tremendous number of things to watch on television, but struggle in survey after survey, they tell us, to find something to watch. And so Gracenote solves that problem by ingesting the metadata from all of the wonderful content producers around the world. And as you might imagine, they produce content metadata in lots of different shapes and sizes, and any data scientists amongst you will know that data in lots of different shapes and sizes is problematic. So we have to normalize that and make sure that it fits a standard which all of our distribution platforms around the world can elegantly use. And so once we've done that and enriched it with high quality imagery, a good synopsis of each program, a description of cast and crew, and episodic images, and so on and so forth, we then have a database which we can then provide to the distribution platforms via APIs or however we deliver that service. And that is what underpins the electronic program guides for the services that most of you, I suspect, will be watching on any given evening or day. And so that in a nutshell is what Gracenote does. It's metadata pinned together with an ID, a Gracenote ID, which solves the search and discovery problem that content owners like Sean and others have to grapple with.
So if I take it back to even more basic terms, and people always talk about metadata and apologies, but obviously it sounds incredibly unsexy as a technology. But however, you put rubbish metadata in, kind of you get rubbish out because nothing will work. If someone builds the best AI engine to recommend things, or so, kind of, it won't work without the metadata. So I'm kind of as you're working with kind of I guess content owners, that we work across the board, really, don't you? Content owners and service providers, kind of. What are the different things they need to do with you and to get kind of to solve this problem, which is, some people would arguably say, the kind of the biggest problem we're facing today, kind of in terms of discoverability and recommendations.
Well, I might take issue with your initial observation that metadata is not sexy. And it's sexy in the sense that images are a crucial part of the way a modern EPG operates. And those images are incredibly high quality, they're very detailed, they're very descriptive. And we work with a tremendous amount of data in the background so the deeper that we describe a program, the more prescriptive we can be in personalizing the image that appears in front of somebody. And so if you take Game of Thrones, that can be described as a sci-fi adventure. It can be described as a romance. It can be described in a lot of different ways. It can be described as an action series. And so a sophisticated distribution platform will know whether the viewer at home has previously watched a lot of romantic content, and they maybe present that same Game of Thrones using an image which perhaps throws up a little bit more of the romantic angle of that particular content, as opposed to the next viewer who watches a lot of action movies, in which case that same piece of content can be presented to them with a stronger action thread to it. And so I would argue that the metadata is absolutely a sexy component of the way in which people find their content on television.
I always regret what I say. That's great, thank you. And I mean, Sean, Dave, from your perspective, kind of metadata probably has always been a bit of a headache for you, and it is kind of, it's a challenge you have to rise to, whether you're using your whatever vendor you may use.
Absolutely. I mean, as Simon so eloquently put, all platforms, require different forms or different types of metadata, and I think from an IP holder or a rights owner, I think we have that metadata in-house. It's then about obviously conforming it to the different specifications. So I think, again, going back to the operational need for a content operations team in-house potentially to be able to conform this data, but then deliver this to a facilitator, deliver this to a technology provider to then obviously have that final input, and that final syndication piece is quite key. But I think, again, the metadata is always going to be something which is something that we, of course, have in-house, but it's about then, of course, conform it to those different platform specifications.
Great. Well, it's time I brought Corinza in, I think, to the discussion as well. Corinza, your help with that you offer your clients, I think, hopefully correctly, I'm going to put in the area of around kind of strategic support, operational support in terms of services launching internationally. So it'd be great to get your perspective on kind of the challenges, the challenges they face. So talk about some other things other than just kind of obviously the metadata we've talked on today.
How long do you have? I mean, obviously at the moment the market is volatile, but it's growing, but it all comes down to share of audience. The clients that I work with, and as my experience running these types of services and international, you're constantly dealing with different markets, different types of audiences, different types of content, and based on how the market is at the moment with such a huge volume and variety of services and types of services and business models, and also the fact that rights owners are now exploiting rights directly much more, for a service owner and operator actually getting content to deliver on to audiences the type of service that you want to offer is becoming increasingly expensive, increasingly competitive, and increasingly difficult to achieve. So the kind of work that I do is really about identifying, really doubling down on who your audiences are, what the challenges are that they're facing, where are they, and then using that to influence the strategy for services as to almost reinvent what they are. Do they need to almost understand that an SVOD D2C service is only ever going to be a part of their business, and that exploiting and licensing content on FAST and AVOD is now something that they have to seriously consider. Introducing hybrid business models instead of, and bringing advertising into their own platforms, what does that look like? Even diversifying their content offer beyond video. I worked with a client last year who's a startup to consider bringing in audio content, podcasts and audiobooks, just to diversify and have a point of difference if there's an audience out there who would find value in that. So it's incredibly challenging across a whole range of reasons, of which I've only touched on a few. But it's also, there are lots of opportunities as well. And I think that at the moment we're at this stage where there's so much scope, there's so much growth, there's so much change, there's so many new market entrants. I mean, thinking about Disney Plus and HBO Max, and with now Discovery, and that wasn't around a couple of years ago. So the market is changing so much, and the dynamics within the markets are changing also. And I think that means that there are real opportunities for services who want to be targeted around a specific type of content and audience. There's an opportunity there to really curate content, but around a specific theme or a specific type of audience. But in saying that, that's even becoming more challenging, because the services, the much bigger mainstream services, are doing that themselves, and they're either producing content to fit that need, or they're acquiring content. And it used to be that it was just like the new shiny stuff that people really wanted, but now the library is so important as well, and the value of library content and the cost of rights for library content has gone through the roof as well. So yeah, it's a tricky time.
I think the whole, particularly we're just staying on the fast kind of market, the fast channel market and the AVOD market, it's interesting the way it's evolved, because predominantly it started off with studios and distributors who are willing to put their remnant archive into the AVOD environment and make it do some work, because it wasn't working otherwise, and they had some successes, and they found an audience, and it built kind of viewership, and it still has largely been about catalogue. We see isolated examples of companies using either, sort of doing originals or first winner stuff, but it's very limited, and it's still about archiving. It's interesting what you say, that kind of content costs are kind of being driven up, and but presumably, as we've seen this market grow and reach kind of significant levels of hype and interest, it's just going to get harder and harder to define that proposition, find the right content for that, and hold on or gain your viewing share. Would you, being an early starter, would you say that's true?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, when we thought about how the FAST space or the AVOD space has evolved, you know, a lot of the FAST channels originally were maybe offsets of YouTube videos. You know, it could have been content that was potentially not produced for linear productions or linear broadcasts. And I think as the market evolves, and I think the way that we look at FAST is absolutely, the markets are evolving at different speeds. I think we highly recognize, of course, the United States being the prominent market for FAST and AVOD at this present time. In fact, some might say maybe 3 to 5 years ahead of already what we're seeing here in Europe. But we can't obviously not recognize that the UK and Germany specifically are rapidly growing markets. I think the FAST space is very much content driven and of course platform driven, but it's very dependent as well on the advertising market, and specifically the connected TV advertising market. And being early adopters, of course, we've tested and learned. You know, we've seen some content and some channels which have performed, some channels that may not have, and we may have been too early at some times. But I think when we're thinking about FAST, again, going back down to content strategy and curation, that is very, very key. And those curations, as Corinne has just mentioned, you know, this could be around single IP. And we're having a lot of success with our flagship formats. It could also be genre-based, again, absolutely. But it also could be brand-based. And having these to be able to pitch into, obviously, a connected TV platform is going to be really where you're going to see your success.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great sector to watch. I mean, if you've got new clients, Corinne's, I guess, developing that proposition to find the space is tougher and tougher, I would say.
Yeah.
But
I think, I mean, a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment is in FAST, and that just wasn't around. Everyone wanted to talk about SVOD last year. But FAST and AVOD absolutely is a key opportunity, I think, for even, you know, for SVOD players as well, who are trying to increase brand awareness and audience reach. FAST could be a perfect opportunity to put, let's say, if you have 6 seasons of a series, to put the first season on a FAST channel, or almost use it as a barker channel for your subscription and premium offering. And I think that's why, you know, Paramount do what they do so well, because, you know, they're using all of their different platforms and business models to really support one another. You know, like the Paramount channel on Pluto really helps to drive a load of traffic for their SVOD proposition, and you know, to sort of own that ecosystem is smart.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't put Star Trek on Pluto just to be kind, I think.
Exactly.
Definitely. But
yeah.
It occurs to me I should just come to the audience maybe and see what questions there may be out there. Give it some thought. I'll come back to you. I've got one more question. I guess on that point and on that section, do we think, I guess some of this is it's just a general kind of market question. Do we see more studio activity in that space round the corner? Do we think kind of could we see the Mandalorian season 1 on FAST serving certain purposes in certain markets, or do you think the studios will remain cautious about their windowing, notwithstanding everything we've talked about already, and AVOD will remain just a space for certain catalogue and library?
Right.
Put your ex-studio hat on, I think, on that one.
So, with studios, you know, at the moment, most of the studios, not all of them, but most of them are engaged fully in developing their own direct-to-consumer services, and to a large extent, they're now focusing on, as much as possible, subscriber growth. That's going to fuel a lot of spend, and you've seen it over the last few years. It's going to continue to fuel a lot of spend in this space, but what we're seeing the beginnings of maybe is a bit of a wobble and perhaps a bit of a course correction back towards profitability as well. Now that's when the problems start, because if you're a program maker and you've been used to making whatever you want at whatever price point you want, because it didn't really matter. It was someone else was going to pay for it through this massive ecosystem, which was rocket fueled. And somebody turns around to you and says to you one day, no, so you can't make that show. And they say, what do you mean I can't make that show? That's when the problems begin, and that's when you're going to have to start looking for other ways of monetizing content. So yeah, I think you'll start to see skinnier bundles, cheaper bundles, or some content being made available for free. But I don't think you're going to see a wholesale kind of swing back to, right, let's just get it out there and sell it for as much as we can just yet, right? Because I think there's still a huge amount to play for within SVOD.
So do we have any questions from the audience at the moment? Oh, we do. So Mike somewhere. Just over here, right in the middle.
Hi, Garrett Goodman from Papercup. I'm interested in international expansion, picking up on what you were saying, Sean. When you go into another market, as you've been an early mover, is there a first mover advantage? Do those who enter those fast markets sooner get the lion's share of audience and revenue, or can you still be successful if you sort of wait to follow the pack?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think going back to the crux of what fast channels are, they are channels sit within an EPG. Okay, so when we think about electronic programming guides, the higher the channel is, the more likely we are going to be discovered. I think discoverability is super, super key. However, before you dip your toe in this fast channel space, I think you've really got to have your content strategy aligned. You've got to have a channel, which our senior management will tell me as well, the channel's got to say what it does on the tin. And that channel really does need to have either prominence already in the market by, this could be a title which has already been distributed on finished tape. We could be now in its third license, not exclusively. We could now be thinking about how to now put this in front of a new audience. So I think there is benefits of obviously being an early adopter, but there is no benefit from being an early adopter when you haven't got your strategy. So your content strategy and then aligning as well with the market. Again, it goes back to what the advertising market does look like on the connected TV space in that specific territory, because again, if that isn't developed, then of course we're only getting eyeballs and we're not getting the revenue returned.
Yeah, the thing that gets said to me every time by people working in this space is we just need to know more about what's working and the data. And here I'm talking about data out, but which your other business knows lots about. And those early movers and the people acting now, I know you talk to a lot of them, and a lot of them are saying, hey, we may not get this right, but we have to be nimble, we have to be innovative, and we have to learn, and that seems to be what they're doing. But, any more questions? No? Okay, I'll go back to my my emergency questions. Just like we talked about, Sky were talking about it, Deb was talking about it, and I think we talked about it with the fast channels. Like everyone else, the world of D2C is a great theory. You cut out your middleman, improve your margins, go straight to the consumer, but you still got to get there. And if you don't have Disney's marketing budget, you've got to get in front of them repeatedly. And I don't think I won't use this term precisely, but in the early days, I think that kind of many of these platforms were effectively wide open, whether they be some of the smart TVs or the Plutos or the Rokus, the Zumas, or they're effectively open, welcoming everybody coming. Now, this is slowing quite significantly from what I understand, and now not only is it slowing, I think they're jettisoning some of the earlier suppliers as they refine what they're doing because they've learned what works. And so is this, I guess, from perspective of sort of your clients, Corinda, but also in terms of your propositions at Banijay and at Beyond, is this, would you agree with that? Would you say that kind of it is going to get more challenging and you're going to have to be sharper about these things?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's like when Amazon channels launched, for example, same with fast channels, there's a new opportunity. The power dynamic is more on the side of the content owners or the brand, please come. Just try this out, experiment, and people will experiment. Then you achieve some growth, and then all of a sudden the power dynamic shifts. And we're now in that stage, particularly with the bigger platforms like Roku and Pluto. They're becoming far, far more, because they're inundated on a daily basis with people who have content that see FAST as a license to print money, effectively. Oh, we've got these rights, they're underexploited, let's just throw them into a FAST channel and hope that will drive incremental revenue. And that obviously isn't the case. And so now they're being far more selective. They're much more keen on curating what the channels are that they include within their platforms. And as a result, that is making them far more picky. The sort of ability to negotiate favorable terms commercially, is becoming more difficult depending on who you are. So the power shift is certainly altered, and it's becoming much more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think absolutely what Corinne's saying, it is becoming tougher to potentially pitch in channels. But I think, again, when we think about the fast space globally, I think different territories are different spaces. And I think when we're thinking about content, we're almost looking at tiers. Again, there will still be territories who are launching fast channel services, who again would be welcoming for more content, which again would have already been on the original side of fast, shall we say. But when we start thinking about those more mature markets, the USA, for example, the UK, Germany, we're almost looking at maybe tier 3 content, which really is those premium brands, those titles that have already sold in territory, those titles which of course have volume and they are obviously built for broadcast. So I think having that in the back of your mind in terms of fast channel strategy, it's about how are we thinking about moving into those territories where it may be tier 3, but also thinking about those tier 1 territories. Because again, of course, in the United States, for example, a lot of owned and operated channels are being launched as well from the connected TV platforms. From their perspective, they want to obviously focus on those. That does open up a new avenue of revenue as well in terms of potential licensing, as opposed to a revenue share model on FAST. But I think it really is about thinking about globally, there's going to be different tiers.
Right, great. Anything to add, David? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it will get more challenging, and one of the reasons for that is that up until now, the really big channel owners haven't been launching channels of their own in that space, but they're starting to do that now. And the more that they do that, the more that they're going to elbow out some of the channels that may have been on those platforms for a while, but kind of, quite frankly, can't really compete at that level. So if you are, with apologies, Fail Army, for instance, you're not going to be on those platforms forever.
Yeah. Simon, what about you, from your view?
Yeah, I mean, fast is a very dynamic world, and it's really interesting to hear the panel speak about the different commercial challenges and all the skills that you need to put a channel together. We're just launching a new sort of evolution of our service, whereby we're sort of streaming channel data as a specific sort of service to fast channels. And one of the things that we envisage in there is that the way in which you can monetize a fast channel is going to be very rapidly developed. You can do something very temporal. You can say, okay, it's the World Cup. We're going to do something for the World Cup. That may be a terrible idea because actually everybody wants to watch the live games. But maybe that is a good idea, and people like you will decide whether it is or isn't. Or you can do something around the Jubilee weekend. There's all sorts of very rapid turnaround things. And the point there is that presents particular search and discovery opportunities and challenges. And that's where we link into. So if you take the Jubilee weekend, and again, I have no idea whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I wager that there'll be a tremendous amount of other content around, whether it be in podcasts, linear, OTT, there'll be a tremendous amount of other content. And it's the metadata linked to the ID that will link to the fast channel that you may or may not decide is a brilliant idea to launch around the Jubilee weekend. But if you have that metadata, that is a key part of your search and discovery and ultimately your commercial strategy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I'd love to also talk more. I think we're actually at time, I think, but about not just the data in as such channels, but also the data out, because we hear every time, we've got to learn more, got to know more. There's no established currency. loads of people have got lots of data, but different people have got different sets of data with different currencies, and they're not sharing most of it. And I think there's a huge challenge there around FAST and AVOD and actually in the broader measurement community. But that is great. Thank you very much. I think we do have to call time, but if you could join me in thanking our panelists, and that's it.